What's up, everybody? If you run a bar and you're always wondering, how do I calculate my variance? You've maybe heard that before, the word variance. It's a bit of a weird one, and people are always a little confused on how to calculate it properly. In this video, I'll show you how to easily calculate it and to understand how your bar is doing and if you're losing product and how much of it, because at the end of the day, losing product is dollars from your pocket. There's something I always found strange is that in any other industry, this is super normal to calculate this. But when you talk about the bar, people will say things like, "Oh yeah, but you know what? You got to keep customers happy. If you underpour, they won't come back." And things like that are true. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying underpour, but if anything, this will also help you to see if people are underpouring, because variance goes both ways. It's not just overpouring and how much you're losing. It could be the opposite. If you're underpouring, that's just as bad in the sense that you could get a bad rep. Word travels fast, right? So the last thing you want to be known as is the bar that has watered down drinks. No matter which way you're going, the point is you have to just measure to see how you're doing. And it's always controversial when it comes to bars, and I don't understand why. But imagine you were selling televisions. I told you, hey, do you know if you're losing any televisions? You'd be like, yeah, because I'm doing inventory and I'm seeing from one inventory to the next what was used. And then I'm looking at my sales and I'm comparing the usage and the sales. This is a very simple example. You might say, hey, so yesterday we had 10 TVs and today we have 5 left. So we used or consumed 5 TVs. Let me check our point of sale. And then you might look at your point of sale report and see that you only sold 4. Well, imagine if you sold 4 TVs, but there was 5 that went missing. Where did that that variance of 1 TV go? Same thing for the bar. But with the bar, the reason it becomes complex is because it's not just a one-to-one, right? A TV is easy because it's one unit, it's one item, it's in your POS, it's the same item, you compare. Where it gets difficult is that when it comes to a bar, one item, let's say a certain tequila, can be used across many different recipes. So you might have the same tequila used in a single, in a shot, in a double, in cocktail A, cocktail B, cocktail C. So what ends up happening is it's harder to track that. Not to mention, it's not typically just a one-to-one, like a TV, for example, or a beer bottle, or a bottle of wine. Well, when it comes to liquor, things are used by the ounce, right? So at a certain point, it's hard to keep track if a bottle was almost half full and now it just looks like a bit less, right? So for those two reasons, that's what makes calculating variances at a bar tough. It's tough to measure the difference between inventories. And then it's also tough to pull a sales report, manually multiply all those ingredients to get that total. Today, what I want to show you is how to calculate the variances at your bar in an easy way. If you think of it like this, I think it'll make everything much easier. Okay, so the variance at your bar really is just your consumption, some people call it usage, minus your sales. I say consumption, but when you think of consumption, don't only think about what was physically consumed. Consumption can entail broken product, stolen product, spilled product. The point is, you started off with a certain amount and you ended off with a different amount. That number, call it what you want. I call it consumption. Some people say usage. Call it what you want, but it's the difference between that beginning inventory and ending inventory. You want to compare that number with the sales. Let's start off with a very simple example, right? If you had, I don't know, let's call it 20 bottles of Corona in stock, right? Beer. The 20 bottles of Corona today. Tomorrow, you start your day, you do your account, and you realize that you have 12. Well, very simple math. I had 20, now I have 12. So I consumed 8, right? So that's just the hard facts. Now, whether someone took some from the back and left with it, whether your staff drank it, whether you dropped 3 on the floor, doesn't matter yet. All we know as a fact is we had 20, we have 12. So that gets us that first number, consumption or usage or whatever you want to call it. Well, now we got to compare that to the sales. Well, the sales, what most people do right now is they'll log into their point of sale back office. They'll look at the sales for that period, right? Because you got to compare apples and apples. So if you're looking at the consumption from, yesterday to today, you want to look at the sales from yesterday and today. Big mistake I see people making. Make sure you're comparing the same period. So on one side, you have consumption, which in this case, like I said, it was 8 bottles of Corona. Well, on the sales side, we're going to look at the point of sale report for that same period. And we're going to say, oh, how many Coronas did we sell? Let's imagine, for argument's sake, that we only sold 5. Well, you would say 8 minus 5, well, that gives us 3. So the variance is 3 units, in this case bottles, of Corona. Why is the variance 3? Well, if we used 8, but we only collected money for 5, that means that there was 3 that we didn't collect money. So that's the importance of variance. The variance will tell you where you're losing money. If you punched in 3 of those bottles as a staff promo, no problem. But at least it's accounted for, so you can say, hey, we used 8 bottles of Corona, 5 were sold at X price, and 3 were punched in a staff promo. No problem. But at least now you know it's 8, it checks out. So I started off with a bottled beer because that's probably the simplest example for people to comprehend. But keep that in mind when you're calculating variances, because it's the same formula even when things get a little more complicated. So if you keep that kind of vision in your head of, hey, it's just what I used and then minus what I sold for the same period, it's that simple. So let's go a bit more complex. Let's take a bottle of tequila. Well, maybe a certain brand of tequila, right? There's many different brands you may be using, and maybe some are upsell options, some are not. Maybe certain brands are using a cocktail and others not, whatever it may be. The point is, in this example, let's just pick one brand. So if you take that one brand of tequila that you want to measure the variance for, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to say, hey, today I counted 10 bottles. Tomorrow, I counted 8 bottles. Well, on the consumption side, that means I used 2 bottles of that brand of tequila. On the sales side, I'm going to look at my point of sale, and now it gets just a little tougher because it's possible that I sold tequila in a shot. Maybe I sold 20 shots of tequila. Maybe I sold 10 different cocktails that had that tequila. Maybe a couple margaritas, right, that had that tequila, that specific brand, etc., etc. So there's a little bit more math, right? With the bottle of Corona, it was easy because it's similar to the TV example I gave, right? I sold this, I used this, compare the two. But now you say the usage is simple, but the sales becomes a little more complex because you got to look at all the ingredients that have that tequila and then multiply it. So what I recommend doing in the early days, if you print that P-mix from your POS, I recommend just putting a little asterisk next to the items that have that tequila and then multiplying, putting the recipe next to it and then multiplying it out. So an example might be if you saw 10 shots of tequila were sold, if you know it was that brand of tequila, add a little asterisk and then go to the next one and you know there was 20 margaritas, put an asterisk. Once you have those 3 or 4 asterisks kind of lined up, then I would put the ingredient for each of that tequila, right? You don't have to write out the full ingredient because you're just measuring that brand of tequila for the moment. So you might say, okay, these shots should be 1 ounce each, so 1 ounce. The margarita should be 2 ounces, 2 ounces, right? And you write it down. And then the last step is you multiply by the quantity sold. So if you sold 10 shots, you're gonna say, okay, 10 times 1 ounce. So that's 10 ounces. The margaritas, like I said, is 20 ounces. So if you sold 20 margaritas, 20 times 2 ounces each is 40 ounces. So now you add up all the ounces and you'll have your total amount of tequila. So now you want to compare the two. But to compare the two, you have to have the same unit of measurement. So very simply put, you can either keep the sales in ounces and then just convert that usage. Remember the 2 bottles, convert it to ounces. So let's pretend each of those bottles were 1 liter. Well, that we know that's 33 ounces or 33.8 if we want to be specific. Well, if that's the case, then you know if exactly 2 bottles were used, it's 33 times 2, so it's 66. So you could do 66 ounces and you could look at the sales, which in this case was, I think it was 40. I forget what I said. But whatever that difference is the variance. And then you know how many ounces you're short. Okay, so those are the steps to calculate. Now, where it gets tough and where I start really recommending a tool like Whisk is that it's not that hard to do, as you guys can see, especially on full items. So if you're selling a lot of bottled beer, it's not too bad. If you're selling a lot of bottled wine, it's not too bad. Where it starts getting tough is when you're selling a lot of liquor, because liquor can be used in so many different drinks. Like I said, shots, singles, doubles, cocktails, etc. And there's so many different brands and a lot of the bottles are partial. So the 2 things that really make it hard for liquor is, one, on the sales side, there's many sold items that have different recipes that you have to multiply to figure out the total ounces sold. And then on the consumption side, inventory is a bit tougher than a typical inventory because you're not just counting, you need to count partials. You might have had half a bottle here, but now there's less. Well, how much is that delta? And that's where using a tool like Whisk, where you have a Bluetooth scale, gives you that precision. So you know, okay, there was exactly this many ounces used. So that's how you calculate the variance. Really simple formula: consumption minus sales. Sales, if you would kind of zoom in, is calculated by saying, what are the items that have this ingredient multiplied by the measurement of that item in the measurement of that ingredient in each item, and that gives you the total ounces sold. And then on the consumption side, if you would zoom in, it's simply your beginning inventory plus any purchases minus your ending inventory. It's just in the example I gave, we're doing it a day apart, so I didn't add any purchases. But if you're doing this on a weekly basis, well, then the formula is, hey, what did I start with? Beginning inventory. What did I buy during this period? And what did I end with? And that gives you that consumption. And then on the sales side, it's looking at the point of sale items that have that ingredient, multiplying it out. And now you have those two key numbers to say, hey, consumption minus sales equals variance, right? So it's really that easy. You do that item per item, and that's how you see where you're losing money. I recommend, if you're doing it manually, to pick your top selling items, right? Because it's going to be very time consuming to do everything, and ultimately it may not be worth it. If you're using a tool like Whisk, of course, it's fine to do everything, because as you do an inventory, of course, you're going to count everything. We're connected to your point of sale. We have all your recipes in the system. You're snapping pictures of your invoices, so your purchases are always up to date. So in a case like that, yes, we give you the variance for every single item you have, and you could sort from, the top losses to the bottom and focus on the top 20, and that's fine. But if you're really doing this with Excel or pen and paper, it would be impossible to do. So I really recommend just picking the top 10 items that you're selling and starting from there.